We're going to start off in Daniel chapter 1 in just a few minutes. But before we do, I want you to come to the realization, if you haven't already, and if you haven't been asleep for the last 50 years, but we are living in very wicked times. This world is no friend of the child of God, and they're showing it a little bit more every day. It's getting to the point to where it's almost dangerous to be a Christian and to live as a Christian, even in this society, even in America, and it's getting worse and worse. And when the right people have their way, they're going to start a full-scale persecution of Christians. It's going to happen. I'm not trying to give you gloom and doom. I'm giving you straight Bible. That's the truth. And if the Lord tarries and hasn't taken his church out of here in the very, very near future, it's going to be almost like the time when the Hebrews were besieged by the Babylonians. It's going to look just like that. But this morning, I want you to understand that we serve a God that cannot fail. He cannot fail. And we're going to look at an example here of 4 teenage boys and how they handled it. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and he besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spoke to Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he would bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes, and this is what he was looking for, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in wisdom, cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and tongue of the Chaldeans. The Babylonians were kind of weird. They would take people that they conquered and bring them in and train them in their ways and then put them in leadership positions. It's kind of like keeping your friends close and your enemies closer. And so the king appointed them a daily portion of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them for 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now, we're getting to the story here. Among those that were captured and among those that were going to be trained to serve under the king were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That was their real names. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, the first thing they did was they took their identity away. And it says here, unto whom the prince of the eunuch gave names. For he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah the name of Shadrach, and of Mishael of Meshach, and of Azariah Abednego. They were all names that glorified the god Baal. A high insult to anyone from Judah. And it said, but listen to this, and this is what you've got to do if you're going to make a stand in this world, if you're going to be what God has called you to be, and if you're going to be able to stand against the wiles of the devil, you're going to have to be like Daniel said. Daniel purposed in his heart. He decided right then and there, it said that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. You have got to determine that you are not going to be part of this mess that we're living in right now. And now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs, and the prince of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, which hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then you will make me endanger my head to the king. He was afraid the king was going to have his head cut off if they didn't eat the king's meat and drink the king's wine, if they didn't look better at the end of that period of time. But then Daniel said to Melzar, to whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, he said this, prove your servants, I beseech thee, for 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Pulse does not sound very appetizing. Anybody ever ordered pulse at the restaurant before? Anybody ever seen it on the menu? Well, it's kind of split between two scholars as to, or scholarly views as to what this is. It's either vegetables or beans. Okay, we'll leave that alone. And so he said, give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and countenance of the children that eat of the king's meat, and as you see fit, deal with your servants. So he agreed. And so Melzar took away their portion of meat and the wine that they should drink, and he gave them pulse. Now, as for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. That's the reward for living for God, for not compromising. God will reward that. Now, at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, the prince of the eunuchs brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and therefore stood they before the king. Teenage boys. Get that through your head. Teenage boys. These weren't seminary graduates and people who had been in the pastorate and all that. They were teenage boys, and they made a stand. And in all matters of wisdom, he found them 10 times better than his magicians and astrologers that were in his realm. It's because they were focused on God. I don't care how smart or stupid you might be, how educated or uneducated you may be. You focus on the things of God and concentrate on the things of God, and you will be amazed at what he will do with you. So if you want power with God, you cannot compromise with the world. You cannot do it. Every time you compromise with the world, your walk with God is not complete, and you will find that you have no real power with God. No real power. And because your allegiances are divided and your judgment will be clouded. And Daniel and his friends decided that they would not compromise no matter what. Really, no matter what. They were taken far from their home. They lost their family. They lost their identity. They lost everything they had, yet they kept their integrity and they stood their ground. And we're going to see it pay off here in Daniel chapter 3. Just look at what happens next. Nebuchadnezzar, the most prideful, arrogant, pompous king that I've ever read about, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and the breadth thereof 6 cubits, and he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, basically 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, a gold statue. I've often said that it would have been most unwise for him to have put it in the parking lot down here in Hogtown, because we'd have picked that thing clean in 24 hours and took it out of here. Indeed. And so then Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, and rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. He set this thing out here in a central location, and he brought all of the people from all of the provinces and all of the known territory that they owned and that they ruled over to come to the big dedication. And then the princes, governors, captains, judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, and rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And then a herald comes out, and he cries aloud, and this is the king's commandment: to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image which the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth at the same hour — there's no trial, there's no lawyers, there's no plea bargains, there's no whatever. It said at the same hour you will be cast in the middle of a burning, fiery furnace. That's what's going to happen. Now, you got to remember, there's teenage boys here, they're listening to this. And the temptation by anybody, teenagers, adults, or anything, hey, let's go along to get along. I mean, what's it going to hurt to bow down to a stupid statue? Nothing will happen to us if we do that. And, God, He'll understand. All right. So, therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp — I don't know why they go over the whole thing, but they do — harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music. Sounds like bluegrass to me. All the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. This is the way that the average person would react. The average person on the street, indeed even the average church member, would go, what's it going to hurt? Nothing's going to come of it. Let's just go with whatever is trending. You can see that on the internet all the time. What is it, Yahoo that does that? They tell you what is trending. You know what? If that's really true, the American public are idiots. They are idiots. Oh my gosh, the stuff that they want to follow and they want to look at that's trending. I mean, I'm going to have to quote William Shatner: get a life, people. Get a life. Oh my Lord, it's crazy. All right, let me get off of that.
It was good, though.
Thank you. I need him here every week. Wherefore at that time, certain of the Chaldeans were suck-ups, and they were trying to gain power and put everybody else down at the same time. The Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. Now, here's the thing. Anti-Semitism is in a class of its own. It's not racism, it's demonic. Anti-Semitism has existed since almost time began, since the times of Abraham, because Christ descended through the Jews. And the devil wanted to shut it down and kill every one of them so it couldn't happen. And now that it has happened, the devil hates it even worse. And so he pushes this anti-Semitism. The Chaldeans were suffering from it. They accused the Jews. And listen to this. Then they spoke to the king Nebuchadnezzar, and they said, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whosoever falleth not down and worship, he shall be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. They're reminding the king now of his law that he just passed. And they've already had a trial run. Then they tell him this: there are certain Jews, there we go again, whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're using their new names. And it said, these men, O king, have not regarded you. They serve not your gods, nor do they worship the golden image which you have set up. They knew how to play to the king. They knew he was a big egotistic baby, and he was evil, and he was prideful, and he was arrogant and pompous. They knew just how to push the buttons. Yeah. Then Nebuchadnezzar, listen to this, full of rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They brought these men before the king. Now he's going to try to save face in front of everybody, because now Daniel apparently was on a trip. He was not present during this particular thing. It was only the other 3 Hebrew children. And they were brought in. He's going to try to save face, because here was 3 teenage boys that disobeyed him right in front of everybody. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do you not serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up?" And then he says this, "Now if you're ready, at whatever time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made," he said, "Well, that's well." And then he gets arrogant, and then he gets haughty, and then he gets to thinking that he's something that he's not. Listen to this. "But if you worship not, you shall be cast in the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." And listen to this arrogant devil. "And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands?" King thinks he's a little something more than God. How arrogant. But you know what? We're living in a land where our politicians think they're better than God. They're smarter than God. Oh, it's all right to teach and preach perversion and practice perversion and kill babies and violate this law and violate that law and even boo God at your conventions. Oh, yeah. But you know what? God's listening to that. And one of these days, these people are going to be humbled just like Nebuchadnezzar's getting ready to be. One of these days, they're going to run slam into God. And they're going to see the truth. And they're not going to like it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, 3 teenage boys. I love these boys. Listen to this. They answered and said to the king, Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful to answer you in this matter. In other words, we're not afraid of you. We have no anxiety whatsoever to answer you about this. We're not scared. We're not going to have to sit here and rehearse how we're going to be politically correct, how we're going to smooth it over, and how we're going to use these long words that don't mean anything like everybody else does nowadays. No, sir. Listen to this. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver. And he's able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he doesn't, be it known unto you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up. I got to have a drink of water after hearing that. Then was Nebuchadnezzar, I love this old English, full of fury. The form of his visage was changed. You know what that means? All of the color went out of his face. Here's the mighty King Nebuchadnezzar that claims he's better than God and that nobody can deliver out of his hands. And these 3 boys told him, we're not afraid of you. And we're not going to worship your gods. And all the color went out of his face. It said the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spoke and commanded, listen to how hateful he was, that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. I saw an artist's sketch based on the history of that time and how they did things. And this furnace was like a big square box. It had an opening in the top, and they had a ladder or steps that went up to it that they would throw people over into that thing. And then down at the bottom, they had the thing where they could stoke the fire and so forth in there. And then there was a window that Nebuchadnezzar had constructed where he had seating outside of that thing where he could sit there and watch people burn alive in that fire. Now, you can't get any more demonic than that. He sounds like he was a member of ISIS, don't it? Same devil, isn't it? Devil ain't changed none at all. He got a few different tactics, but it's the same devil. And so he wanted them to heat that bad boy up 7 times more than it was supposed to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. And then to add insult to injury, it said that he had them bound in their coats and their hosen, and even put their hats on and their other garments, and then they were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. He wanted them to burn a little bit longer. That's how mad he was. And therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace was exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's really hot. When it was so hot, it killed the people that throwed them in there. And then these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound. They tied them up after they put all their clothes on them, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. He tied their arms, he tied their legs so where they would hit the bottom of that thing when they came in there. They couldn't get up, they couldn't run out, they couldn't jump out the window or do anything like that. They were tied up when he threw them over in there. And got a picture, this king sitting in his chair, watching through the window, expecting to get some form of demonic entertainment. But listen to this. Therefore, then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astonished. And he rose up in haste. He no doubt he got up out of his chair and he looked over in that window just a little bit closer. And he said to his counselors, he said, "Did we not throw 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?" And they answered and said, "True, O king." But he answered and said, "Lo, I see 4 men loose. They're not tied up anymore. And they're walking around in the midst of the fire. And they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Can you hear the counselors saying, "What does he look like? What does he look like?" And the king would look back from his window and he'd say, "His hair is white as snow, and his eyes were a flame of fire. His feet are like brass, his voice are the sound of many waters. His countenance looks as bright as the sun, and in his right hand were 7 stars, and out of his mouth goes a sharp 2-edged sword, and he's holding the keys of death and hell in his hand." That's what he saw when he looked in there. What he saw was the God that cannot fail. That's what he saw when he looked in there. And now Nebuchadnezzar's going to change his tune. From his arrogant pompous, he's scared to death. He looked and saw them boys walking around. They weren't scrambling to get out there, walking around in the furnace. They had somebody in there with them. Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and he spoke. Listen, I love this. And he said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God." Oh yeah, that changed his tune. He said, "Come forth and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth out of the midst of the fire. I wonder how long they'd have walked around in there before the king called them out of there. They weren't the least bit upset. They won't hurt. They won't burning up. They won't even hot. Walking around in a furnace that was heated 7 times hotter than it was supposed to be. And the princes, and the governors, and the captains, and the king's counselors being gathered together saw these men, first of all, upon whose body the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, not a one. Neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed over them. One time I tried to light a gas grill with gasoline instead of lighter fluid in my backyard when I lived in Monroe. And when I stuck the match to that thing, it went kaboom, and there was a mushroom cloud came up under the maple tree right over top of it. And my mom heard the explosion, and she came outside and first of all said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah." And when I turned around, she started laughing at me because I had no more eyebrows. And I didn't even get up that close to the thing. But these men were in the middle of the fire, and not a hair of their head was even singed, and they couldn't even smell where the fire had been on them. And then Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God." And he's changed his law. He said, "Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sword." He at least got that right. He got that right, because there is nobody that can deliver like God. There is no one. And then the king gave them a promotion. You know, so many sermon topics can be pulled from this. Now, I don't have time to do all of that, but I'm telling you that first of all, you will walk in a fire in your lifetime, if not many of them. And the reason that you did not see the fourth one come out of that furnace is he is in there waiting for you, and he's in there waiting for me, because he will walk with you through your fires just like he did with those boys right there that trusted in him. And when you finally get out of it, you won't have not even the smell of this world on you. That's the thing. But you've got to be focused. You've got to be dedicated just like them. And you've got a purpose in your heart that you will not be part of the wickedness of this world and get all of that on you while you're down. This is not our home. That was not their home. Babylon was not their home. Judah was their home. And one of these days, like he sang, "I'll be back." I love that song. Oh my goodness. Woo. He's coming for you and I. And I don't want the smell of this world on me when he comes for me either. I'll conclude with the lyrics to a song that only John Starnes can sing. And believe me, I can't sing like John Starnes. I don't know of any human being on earth that could sing like John Starnes. But this is what